On a sunny day in downtown Philadelphia, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air around a charming coffee shop. Inside, the sound of clinking glasses and the buzz of conversation created a welcoming and vibrant atmosphere. Barron Trump, the youngest son of a former president, sat at a small table near the window, a book open in front of him. He was not trying to attract attention, dressed simply, trying to blend in with the other customers. Barron had chosen this cafe to find a moment of peace, away from the public scrutiny that had always surrounded his life. As the son of a public figure, he was accustomed to being the center of attention, but here, among strangers, he felt a rare sense of anonymity. He was absorbed in his book when a loud, angry voice interrupted the quiet atmosphere of the cafe. "You think you're better than the rest of us?" The voice was loud enough to silence all the surrounding conversations. Heads turned to a man standing a few feet away from Barron's desk. The man, who appeared to be in his 40s, had a ruddy face and an intense expression. His clothes, while not in bad condition, showed signs of wear, as if he had been through hard times. Barron, surprised but not frightened, looked at the man. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone watched the scene unfold. "You have everything on a silver platter, don't you? Do you know what it's like to fight?" The man continued, his voice shaking with anger. The other customers exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. The barista behind the counter hesitated, his hand hovering over the phone. Barron, remaining calm, slowly closed his book and placed it on the table. "Sir," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I don't know what offended you, but perhaps we can talk about it." The man laughed dismissively. "Talk? What could you possibly have to say that someone like me would want to hear?" The cafe fell silent, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. Instead of reacting to the man's aggression, Barron did something unexpected. He stood up from his chair, his posture relaxed but attentive, and approached the man. "Please sit," Barron said calmly, his voice diffusing the tension. The man hesitated, but the unexpected offer took him by surprise. He stood, arms crossed, eyeing Barron suspiciously. "Why would I want to sit with someone like you? You're just a spoiled brat who will never know what it's like to live in the real world," the man replied, his voice still dripping with sarcasm. A few customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging worried glances. Barron kept his composure. "Maybe you're right," he admitted. "I haven't been through the same hardships as you. But if you'll sit down, maybe you can tell me what it's like." For a moment, the man seemed to hesitate. The firmness in Barron's voice was not a challenge, but an invitation. Instead of sitting down, the man took a step back, his voice lowering but still laced with bitterness. "You think I owe you my story? You think it will make you feel better about yourself?" Barron didn't look away. "I think everyone has a story that deserves to be heard," he said, his words cutting through the silence. The man hesitated, as if unsure whether to walk away or accept the unexpected civility. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the man pulled out the empty chair and sat down, crossing his arms defensively. "Fine," he said. "You want to hear about the real world? I'll tell you." The tension in the cafe shifted, not completely dissipated, but less intense. The barista lowered her hand from the phone, and the customers leaned in to listen, pretending not to be paying attention but caught up in every word. The man took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "You see me and think I'm just an angry guy for no reason," he began, his voice heavy with sadness. "But you don't know what it's like to lose everything. I had a job, a family, a good life. But then the factory where I worked closed, just like that. Hundreds of us were left with nothing, only empty promises of jobs." The cafe was silent except for the soft sound of the espresso machine in the background. The man continued, his voice growing quieter but still filled with pain. "I tried to hold it together for my wife and kids, took any job I could find, but when you're desperate, it doesn't take long for you to break. My wife left, took the kids with her, said she couldn't live like this anymore." He paused, his eyes shining. "I can't even blame her." Barron remained silent, his face impassive, but there was empathy in his eyes. "Do you know what it's like to walk into a room and know that everyone is judging you, thinking you're nothing?" The man continued, his voice shaking. That's my life now. Every day. The words resonated not just with Barron, but with everyone listening. A woman at a nearby table shifted in her seat, suddenly absorbed in her cup of coffee, as if trying to process what she had just heard. And then I see someone like you, the man said, his voice rising a little, sitting here, in your expensive clothes, reading a book like you don't have a care in the world. And it makes me furious, because no matter what I do, I'll never have what you have. Barron took his time filling the silence. He let the man's pain settle, respecting its weight. Finally, he leaned forward, his arms resting on the table. I don't know what it's like to be in your shoes, Barron said softly, but I know what it's like to feel judged, to feel like people have already decided who you are before you even say a word. The man looked up, his eyes deepening. What could you possibly know about this? Barron's response wasn't what anyone in the cafe expected. It changed the conversation and the atmosphere of the room in a way no one could have predicted. Barron took a deep breath, his stoic composure making the tension in the room seem less suffocating. You might think I have it easy because of my name, and in some ways, you'd be right, Barron began. I've never had to worry about a roof over my head or food on the table. But that doesn't mean I don't know what it's like to feel misunderstood. His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made everyone in the cafe lean in a little closer. Everywhere I go, people make assumptions about me. They think they know who I am, what I believe, what I've done, just by my last name. They don't see me as a person. They see a caricature, someone they can project their own frustrations onto. Like what's happening here? The man's face softened, as if Barron's words had touched a nerve. He didn't say anything, but his posture changed slightly, his arms moving away from the defensive position. Barron continued, his tone measured but genuine. I'm not saying my struggles are the same as yours. They're not. But pain is pain. Feeling invisible or misunderstood is something we all face, no matter our background. The cafe was completely silent now, the kind of silence you feel when you reflect. Even the barista had stopped in her tracks, her act of cleaning the cups instantly forgotten. Barron leaned back a little, giving the man room to absorb what he had just said. I'm not here to argue with you, or to change your mind. I just want to understand, because I think we all carry things that no one else sees, and maybe if we were a little kinder to each other, it would make a difference. The man's gaze softened, and for a moment it looked like he might stand up again, but instead, he exhaled deeply, as if releasing something heavy he had been carrying for a long time. Do you really believe that? He asked, his voice softer now, almost uncertain. Barron nodded. I do, and I think deep down you do too, or you wouldn't have told me your story. The man leaned back, his heavy exterior falling away a little more. He glanced around the cafe, as if realizing for the first time how many people were watching. A flash of self-consciousness crossed his face, but then he looked back at Barron. You're not what I expected, he admitted, his voice softer now. But the real surprise wasn't what Barron said next, it was what the man did in response. He sat back in his chair, his body language changing from defensive to contemplative. For a long moment, he said nothing. The cafe was quiet, all the customers caught up in the silent tension of the moment. Finally, he spoke. His voice had lost its earlier hostility. I came here full of anger, he said, shaking his head. Anger at the world. Anger at people like you, who I thought had everything handed to me. But maybe I've been carrying this anger for too long. Maybe it's not about you after all. Barron didn't respond immediately. He let the man's words hang in the air, giving them the weight they deserved. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and measured. I guess it's easy to blame people we don't know. It's harder to face what really hurts us. But you did it today, and I respect that. The man looked up, his eyes meeting Barron's. For once, there was no trace of anger, just a kind of gratitude. You're a good kid, he said, almost desperately, as if the admission cost him something. I don't say that often. The change in tone was palpable. The tension that had filled the cafe dissolved, replaced by an unexpected sense of connection. The barista smiled slowly as she resumed her work. A couple at a nearby table exchanged glances, their expressions softening. Then the man did something that surprised everyone. He reached his hand across the table. Barron hesitated for only a second before taking it firmly. "I'm sorry," the man said, his voice soft with emotion, "for judging you before I knew you." Barron smiled, a genuine expression lighting up his face. "And I'm sorry if I've ever given you any reason to feel that way." The outstretched hand lingered for a moment before the man snatched it back. He stood, straightening his clothes and looking around the cafe. "I guess I owe everyone here an apology, too," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "I came here angry, but this boy, he reminded me that sometimes all we need to do is listen." The cafe erupted in soft applause, not loud or thunderous, but moving. The man nodded, visibly moved, and made his way to the door. He paused before leaving and looked back at Barron. "Thank you," he said simply, and then he left. What happened next wasn't quite as dramatic, but it left everyone in the cafe with food for thought. When the door closed behind the man, the cafe seemed to take a collective breath. Conversations slowly resumed, but they weren't the same. There was a new energy in the room, a shared understanding between strangers who had just witnessed something extraordinary. Barron returned to his seat, picked up his book, and took a sip of his now cold tea. But before he could fully return to his solitude, a woman from a nearby table approached. She looked to be in her 60s, with friendly eyes and a warm smile. "Young man," she said, "I just wanted to say that what you did was wonderful. You didn't have to listen to that man, but you did. And I think it reminded us all that sometimes empathy is all it takes to change things." Barron smiled humbly. "Thank you, ma'am. I think we all want to be heard." The woman smiled and returned to her desk, leaving Barron to his thoughts. Around him, the cafe buzzed with new energy. Customers were smiling, chatting, and offering small gestures of kindness, holding doors, sharing smiles, and even bussing tables. As Barron left the cafe, the day seemed brighter, not just for him, but for everyone who had been a part of the moment. The man's anger, Barron's empathy, and the simple act of listening created a domino effect of understanding and compassion. As Barron walked down the street, he couldn't help but think about how small acts can have such a big impact. He didn't know the man's full story, and he probably never would. But in that coffee shop, for those few moments, they connected, and that connection changed the tone of the entire room. Maybe that's all it takes sometimes, Barron thought. Just a little empathy to remind us that we're not so different after all. This story isn't just about Barron or the man he met that day. It's about all of us. The way we carry our struggles, the way we judge others, and the way we can choose to listen instead of react. If this story touched you, take a moment today to practice some empathy. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's spread a little more understanding, one story at a time.